This is terrestrial ecology video 5 of 6. We're almost done. We're picking up on slide 80, and then we're going to go until slide 104 for video 5. So starting with climate, the climate of an area, of a biome, or of an ecosystem is the average weather conditions over time. That's the key term there, is that it's over time, it's a rate. Weather is just the local, it's the short-term basic stuff, but climate is the average over time stuff. And they're based on the latitude and elevation. So the higher up you go and the further north you go, the different is the same pattern, same trends in a climate. And that goes back to that quiz that we had on our last video. Okay, so looking at the climate zones now, if you look based on color, the polar stuff is pretty basic. North Pole up here, South Pole down here. Notice, please, that the North Pole has a few small land masses, Siberia, northern Asia, and then you come over to northern Canada, and Alaska is not even, well, North Alaska, but you see the Arctic Circle is above all of that. So most of the Arctic is actually, you've got Greenland and Iceland and stuff, but most of the Arctic Circle is not land, whereas if you look at the Antarctic Circle, there is a big continent down there. So polar, under the North Pole, no land. South Pole, there is land. And then the subarctic, where you see a lot of snow, is this dark blue. Up here, the cooler, temperate area, so the up here, polar, subpolar, temperate. You see along the coast here, and then along here, this would be the temperate zone, and then still temperate zone but less rainfall, the drier regions in yellow. Excuse me. So the mountainous regions, that elevation messes with stuff, so you see different climate in the mountainous regions, and then you see the subpolar along here, the southern United States, and then in here in the Mediterranean, and then you come down into the tropical and the green areas closer to the equator. The upwelling zones, where you're getting right here, you see some specific based on current, based on temperature patterns, and those are really important. We'll talk about that when we get to the aquatic ecology, but those end up being really, really important for aquatic life. Okay, so pretty obvious, the different climates have different animals in them, different plants in them, and so the climate itself will determine what you see as far as vegetation, and therefore what you see as far as animal life. So essentially, all the biomes are determined by the amount of rainfall and the latitude. A biome is a large terrestrial region characterized by similar climate, soil, plants, and animals. Each biome contains ecosystem inside. So somebody was asking me, what the difference is. A biome is the larger area, it's the region, and the ecosystems within that biome you can have more than one ecosystem within those biomes. So that would go back, like you have your biome, your whole north temperate biome right here, but you see the temperate, the cool temperate here, you see the drier stuff here, you see the mountain here, so you'd have 3 different ecosystems within that one biome. Okay, that's good for that slide. So, again, comes back to the same thing what I was just talking about. You see the different biomes based on climate, based on latitude, based on rainfall. And notice that a lot of them are kind of described by the plant life, because that plant life is going to be determined by which biome you live in. Summing it up a little bit different as you get to, this is actually a really helpful graph if you guys take a look at this in more detail. Decreasing temperature, hot to cold, as you go from the equator to the poles. Decreasing precipitation, like a rainforest type thing, all the way to a desert type thing. So in the tropical, close to the equator, tropical, temperate, subpolar, and polar. So in the tropical, with very little rainfall, you see a desert moving into a savanna, characterized by grasses, moving into shrubs in a shrubland, a seasonal forest, and then a rainforest, and the different amounts of rainfall. In a temperate climate, you would see again the desert, but notice the deserts look a little bit different. In a desert and a tropical, very little to no plant life. In a desert and a temperate, you see a little bit more plant life, moving into a grassland, a chaparral, and then deciduous forest, and then coming up into the subpolar coniferous forest, and then a tundra in the polar. So notice that you really have more options where you're in the tropical climate, because that increasing temperature gives more options to you with changing amounts of precipitation, whereas the cold weather you really only have one option. Okay, so talking about each of the different ecosystems or different biomes as we go through here. So desert, excuse me. A desert is characterized that the evaporation is greater than the precipitation. So a desert, really, really important, a desert does not have to be cold. Or, I'm sorry, not necessarily hot. Can be cold. Not necessarily. Okay, you can have deserts. Antarctica is technically a desert because there is little to no rainfall, and the evaporation is, the winds and everything are picking up and evaporating some of that ice and some of the snow on the ice. So deserts cover about 30% of the Earth. Looking at desert biomes, if you look at a tropical desert, a temperate desert, and a polar desert, notice the different temperatures. You start up at a tropical desert, really warm temperature, going up to even warmer. Relatively small change in temperature, whereas in a temperate desert you get a much higher range in temperature, and then in a polar desert an even higher range in temperature. So it's not necessarily always hot. There's actually a pretty big variation in temperature. You can be freezing at nighttime. It can change as much in a day with the sun coming up and going down. It can be at or below freezing at night, and then 100 degrees during the day. It's pretty ridiculous. And then you see precipitation down in the bottom of these graphs in the blue, and you see the different patterns in precipitation in the tropical versus the polar. And notice that the tropical really clearly has rainy seasons, whereas the temperate and the polar, temperate has a little bit of a rainy season, and then the polar is pretty much the same, not much rain throughout the whole year. Forest biomes have enough precipitation that we're seeing lots of trees. Again, you can find them in all three of your latitudes, all of your regions. So again, looking at those graphs, the same as we looked at for the polar, you see your temperature stays pretty much the same in a tropical, much bigger range in polar, and your rainfall is much, much different. Again, that rainy season and the rainy season up here, non-rainy season here, much less difference here, although you see a little bit of it, and then even a little bit here of a rainy season versus a not rainy season with more water in the forest biomes. A taiga is an evergreen coniferous forest, so talking about the different types of forest, you see that in that subpolar they need colder places, long, dry, cold winters. Summers are short and very mild. A lot of sunlight. Remember, this is some of that places where the sun can just kind of skim along the horizon for a long time, so you get a lot of sunlight during the day, especially in the summer. Northern part of North America, this would be up like Maine, Washington State, and then into Canada for the most part. Still in the taiga, you have high elevation, lots and lots of biodiversity, although it tends to be centralized. You see a lot of that, that rainfall in the mountains, the snow in the mountains reflecting and releasing water that adds to the biodiversity downstream and adds to the ecosystem downstream. Cone-bearing trees, the evergreens, keep the needles all year round. That helps the trees survive the long, cold winters. They're photosynthesizing throughout the winter, as opposed to the other trees that lose their needles in the winter. They have to keep the needles. They have to keep that, because if they don't have that, they're not going to be able to get enough food in that short summer. A tropical rainforest near the equator. You guys all are familiar with rainforests, with tropical rainforests. Warm temperatures, lots of humidity, lots of rainfall, rains every day, at least once. Huge biodiversity, very high, year-round. They're very uniform. That's the big thing about rainforests. They may or may not have a rainy season depending on where you are, but they're very uniform. The temperature range is very small. The humidity range is very small. They're pretty much the same. That's what makes them so sensitive. If you have just a little bit of a change in climate, that can throw their whole balance way off. The tropical rainforest is really cool because if you look at the different, there's different layers in that forest. So you see the ground layer, you see the shrub layer, the understory, the canopy, and then the emergent layer. And what's really great is that you have different species at every layer. So what adds to the biodiversity is that you essentially have almost 5 mini ecosystems inside this one rainforest ecosystem. It minimizes competition. It allows animals to coexist. So the toucan would live in the canopy, the eagle would live in the emergent layer, and so therefore they would both be able to survive, whereas perhaps before they may not have been able to coexist. One may have been eating the other. Temperate rainforests are just beautiful, absolutely amazing. Picture like southern Alaska, Washington State. If you guys, I really hate to be this person, but if you guys have seen Twilight, all of that really, really green in Washington State, that's a temperate rainforest. They're usually coastal, huge, huge trees, the redwoods, the Douglas fir, very moist environment. The ground is very spongy, a lot of moss and a lot of shrubs and small plants all around you. It's absolutely so green. And then temperate forest, this is more like New England. Again, absolutely beautiful. Moderate temperatures, a medium range in temperature, warm summers and cold winters, lots of rain, lots of diversity in types of tree. They're the ones that have the beautiful fall colors. This is where you lose the leaves during the winter, which helps with the soil, keeps it really nutrient rich, all that decay in the soil. And then they pick up the leaves in the summer because their summer is long enough. And make sure that you guys are actually looking at these, that you're pausing this and looking at these food webs too, to give examples of what critters are living in each of these ecosystems. Grassland is a little more erratic rainfall, so it's not going to support the trees. Fires are more common. It tends to be a little bit drier, and that actually is really good for grasslands. They sound horrible to have this fires all the time, wildfires all the time. They actually kind of reset everything and make it start all over again. Grass grows very quickly. The ecosystem springs back very quickly, and so it kind of resets and balances everything back out. And they're good, as long as they're not too much, and as long as it's not man-made, keeps everything very balanced. So grasslands and the chaparral biomes, you see, we go back to these graphs, and hang on, I'll go back. Again, you see the tropical, very little change in temperature. Hopefully you're noticing a pattern here, down to a high range in temperature in the polar. Hopefully you're seeing this difference. You again see the wet, dry season in the tropical versus a not so much in the polar, a temperate in the middle somewhere. And you see the different types of plants in a tropical versus a polar. Savanna is a tropical and subtropical grassland. Think like Africa, think zebras and lions, stuff like that. Warm all year long, has that really, really strong wet and dry season. The chaparral is temperate. These are the coastal, winters are mild and wet. Long, hot, dry summers. Again, you have that wet, dry season, but a little bit more mild winters, a little bit smaller range in temperature. Moderate climate, lots and lots of spiny, really thick shrubs, still the wildfire going on there. Think like North Midwest. Is where you really see this. A lot of people kind of mistake these for deserts, but they're not. They have a lot more plant life, and they support a lot more animals than a desert would. And then the temperate grasslands, this is that fertile soil. This is the Midwest. This is where we grow all of our crops. The soil is great. This is where we graze all of our cattle. Hot, dry summers, great soil, cold winters. This is the American Midwest. And then the tundra, the polar grasslands, is cold, cold, cold. You have really, really short summer that has sunlight almost 24 hours a day, if not 24 hours a day, depending on where you are. And then a really, really cold winter. This is about 10% of Earth's land. So again, that food web, make sure you're comfortable with that you can, give some examples of some species that live in these different places. A really, really short summer and a very long winter. So these critters just almost, it seems like they pop out of nowhere. You've got migrating stuff moving in. You've got birds and stuff that are hibernating, small mammals that are hibernating, tons and tons of flowering plants and berries and everything. And it kind of pops out for that couple months in the summer and then disappears again for the rest of the year. And I guess that is it. We're going to stop there.